Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It is May 27th on Top Voice Tuesday. We're excited to have you again and excited to welcome Matt Stone, our guest for this week. It's going to be a really interesting conversation about the destructive power of low trust. I think it's going to be, when Matt and I first met, we had an opportunity to dive into this kind of in a random way. And so I'm excited to have that chance to really share back with you. As always, these episodes are hosted on my YouTube channel, Michael J. Lopez 9, at the end of this show. So you can go back and watch all of those. Please subscribe when you get a chance. And we've started a newsletter built off the back of these that comes out every Friday. And that newsletter's got insights from this episode, as well as insights from my book, which you can see behind me, and a few other little tidbits for people who want to subscribe to that. So, and please do jump into the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from, and we're excited to have you. We'll take some questions. So with that, Matt Stone, I'm going to give you the chance to introduce yourself, and is customary with this show. Please introduce yourself. Tell us what you do, and how did you get to the top of the Top Voice Mountain?
I'll let you know when I get to the top of the mountain. Matt Stone here. What we do? Well, my company's called Behavioral OS. I'm a recovering lawyer, a consultant, a BD guy. But what we primarily do with Behavioral OS is we turn around at-risk leadership teams that are suffering from communication breakdown and low trust. And we do that for a lot of healthcare organizations, in government, and in other areas of the private sector. But healthcare is the big one. And how did I get to the top of the mountain?
Yeah, tell us what you do.
Gosh,
How did you do it?
I don't know what everyone else has said, but the first and honest answer is I don't know. I have, because I'm not the algorithm god, but I was a fairly early adopter of LinkedIn, and over the years have tried lots of different things in terms of having a presence on LinkedIn. But I think it's just fairly consistently putting out content while the type of that content changes. We tried video. I've tried to be, some humor. I try to put out things that either make me laugh, make me think, or something that I think someone will find value in, and occasionally write some longer form posts. And I think consistently doing that for a period of time probably got me the top voice status.
Yeah, we've talked about this recently, and most people sort of tongue in cheek say they're not exactly sure, how the algorithm found them, and I think that's maybe part of the beauty. But what I love about your description, I think it's true, is some video, some short form, some long form. I did a lot of long form posts. I was writing, I think, there's like a 2,100 character limit, I think, on a post. I often would break that and have to edit down. And I found a lot of people were really engaging with that type of content. So, being authentic, sharing a variety, but being consistent, certainly a big piece of that. So for those aspiring top voices out there, be consistent, bring some variety, be authentic, post a lot, and you too might get to the top of the mountain. So let's talk about this, Matt, because you and I, when we met, got into a deep conversation. We do similar things with teams. And so let's just talk about today and what we're experiencing. So when you look at the current landscape, and, we're all living through the same reality to some degree, social, economic, organizational, what are the signs that you see that we're low on trust across all of these systems?
Well, if you're sleeping, you wouldn't see them necessarily. But if you're awake and looking around, they're all around you. So if you're not seeing them, maybe meditate a little bit more. I just meditated before this just to get my head square, because I'm so distracted by so many things in my own head. But if you get quiet and look around, the signs are everywhere. Now, I mean, very recently, sort of what will probably resonate with some people is a great example is, the bond market, for example. I remember taking economics classes many, many years ago, and they talked about how there was a science to it, but there was an art to it. And the art had to do with sort of human psychology and ultimately trust. um, and so when people trust in your market, in your country, in your institutions, they're willing to put their money there. And when they don't trust it, they're not, and the value goes down. And so that's a great example. So we're seeing this sort of erratic, chaotic decision making going on at the highest levels politically. And so the market goes down, the market goes up, and a few people can profit from that. But most, in the grand scheme of things, it is lowering our value as a country and our institutions. Um, so that's just one example. But then, I mean, there's study after study after study. I actually was doing some research on this before our call, and I found a Deloitte article from a few years back, um, and it said uh, the good news is that the positive relationship between trust and the macroeconomy is well known. Countries where businesses, governments, and other institutions have engendered more trust experience stronger per capita real GDP growth, a standard
Mm.
measure of economic prosperity. So that's just one kind of realm where there's such a direct link
Yeah.
between trust and gain, and that's just one of many.
Yeah, yeah, I think, and I saw this, and look, and we've got a comment from Jeremy Grandstaff. He's a big dialer in, so he's always here. So thanks for tuning in, Jeremy. I saw Moody's lowered the credit rating for the U.S. the first time in whatever, I think, ever. Right? It's the first time it's ever been down. And look, we're not here to make a commentary about the the veracity of any one decision, but I think what we're talking about is the macro view of the uncertainty of maybe what's going to happen next. And I would draw the difference between the lottery and an annuity, right? The lottery is designed to hit it big, and we all have a chance theoretically. You have a very small chance. But what you just described was the value of an annuity, which is a 5% to 7% gain over time is much more certain. Therefore, I have higher trust. Now that's at the economic macro level. You do a lot of work with in government, healthcare, other companies. What are you seeing in terms of how that makes its way down into organizational structures?
Well, in healthcare, there's a direct line between lack of trust and poor patient care, and ultimately lower patient satisfaction scores, which lowers the amount of money you bring in, and higher risk, which creates potentials for more financial loss from any number of things. So there's a really, direct line in healthcare. But name your industry. I mean, at its root, every business transaction, every kind of business activity has trust at the very bottom of it, at the core of it. It's at the foundation. And so, um, I think I've maybe lost the thread here, but basically, it's played out in that when you have a lack of trust, and it's a broad term that I want to say that as well. When we use the word trust, it's kind of like the word respect or any number of words, any number of values, where it's such a big word. It means so many different things out of context that the utility of talking about it generally goes down pretty fast. So if we're talking about building sustainable, highly profitable businesses, um, then I think ultimately it comes down to how do you build an organization that has people who want to do a good job for that organization and customers who want to keep paying for the goods and services that the organization offers. And that comes down to building human trust between
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Let's talk about the levels because I think you bring up an interesting discussion about this idea that there's levels to this. I define trust simply as do I have an understanding of what's going to happen next? And can I count on you for that next thing to happen to actually occur? Right. It's really one of the things I talk about in my book. And this is research by a leading neuroscientist in the world. Her name's Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, which is this idea, our brains are prediction machines. Our brains are constantly guessing based on our own referential experience what's going to happen next. And to me, trust is simply does that prediction match reality? to the greatest extent possible. And so there's real neuroscience, which is sort of interesting. So between you and I, right, we did some planning and we dialed in 15 minutes before this. I trusted that you were going to be on time. That's the first most simple version of this transaction between the two of us. But when I go to one of the reasons Starbucks is so effective, or at least has been, they're experiencing some decline, is the coffee's not great, but I trust every time I go in there, I will have the same experience, right? That's another version of trust. When I get into an Uber or a Lyft, I know I'm going to, for the most part, get into that. When you talk about levels to this and you're working with teams, where is that trust starting to fragment within the teams that you work with? At the personal level, at the organizational level, at the transactional level?
Hmm. Okay, you brought up several things
I did.
that
I
I
did.
can't ignore before I get to
Okay.
the question
Let's
that
do it.
ended up
Let's do
popping
it.
out at the end of that. But I'm going to
We're
go
off
back.
script.
Yeah. I really like this point about thinking about trust more deeply. And I can trust someone that I don't like. You know, maybe I don't like the way they communicate, and I know that they lie even. Like you can, but they're so consistent with it that you know what you're going to get. And that's like the basic level of being able to predict the future and
Right.
not worry, you know what's going to happen. And so in our survival, instincts, it's like there's a little less friction there because I'm not worried about it. And I just want to honor that. I want to build off of that point that you made because I think it's really, really important. So now to fast forward to the tail end of the question you posed. In the work that we do, there is often, you might call it organizational distrust for various reasons. But I would say the bigger issue is very much interpersonal related. It is, if I lack trust of the organization, it's because of the interactions I've had with other people.
Mm.
um, and I also have experienced a number of different clients, not just in healthcare, but across the board, where they will say, I like this company. I trust this company. It's just this, my boss, that's a
Mm.
problem. Right. So that can happen. But typically the people we work with, it's a breakdown of trust between human beings and for a whole number of factors. But yeah, it's an environment where people do not feel relaxed enough to be themselves. Uh,
So
and
let's
it
talk about
creates all
some of the
kinds of
factors.
problems.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
some of the factors because I resonate with this. We've got a question from Jeremy I want to get to in a second. I think this is a really astute observation that trusting an organization is different than trusting a person, right? When we think about an organization, it's this entity full of a lot of different things in it. And what we tend to trust in those things are systems, right? So, will the systems work in ways that I expect, right? The mail is a system that we trust on some level. They don't always get it right, but I trust that if I drop something off, it will eventually show up, even though I don't have to understand the middle part of that transaction. But
Mhm.
what you're describing is then the sort of near in experience of the person that I'm interacting with. Do I trust that they have my best intentions at heart? Is this idea
Right.
right? Right, right.
Right.
Do you care about me on a level that
Right.
so how are you helping companies or helping individuals work through
Mhm.
that, right? When you get into a team and that's what's
Mhm.
happened, walk us through a scenario.
Well, a scenario would be a team where, especially a leadership team, where the function of that team is to set the standard for a whole lot of people, hundreds or thousands or even tens of thousands of other people. And so if that team is not functioning well, if you don't have at least the baseline level of trust where those conversations are going on, where you're talking about the elephant in the room, where
Yeah,
you're problem solving, the research is not new, and it's well known that higher trust makes you more innovative, more agile, deliver better service. So we know this, but why is it still so difficult, right? So knowing isn't the same as doing.
I
Um,
love that.
I mean, it's like diversity right now that's kind of not a word that's easy to talk about, and yet all the research shows that when you nurture healthy diversity and inclusive practices, your business does better. That doesn't mean we all change and make it happen overnight. Same thing with trust building. It's all interrelated. um, so yeah, I mean, sorry, could you repeat the last question again?
So,
I get off on these
so when
tangents.
yeah, that's okay. When you walk into a team and there's low trust, how
Yeah,
are
yeah.
you helping
I don't.
them repair and rebuild?
Ah, ah. The the first three letters of the word trust are the first three letters of the solution, which is truth. And the etymology,
Yes,
if you go back into the root of those words, right? I mean, you've got to get to the truth. And the former practicing lawyer in me goes back to this a lot, because so often when you go into I'm avoiding using the word toxic, because that's another word although there are toxic situations, I don't want to overuse it either. But when you go into an environment where things are really at risk, you can just feel it. I'm sure you see this. The bow is breaking, and people develop their own narrative. So they've got a story. And the higher the risk, the higher the fear, the longer the resentments and the fear have been boiling, or maybe they're not at boil yet, but they've been simmering in that pot. The flavors have been developing, and people get more and more entrenched in their view of what's happening, why it's happening, and who's at fault. And the answer is they're not the one at fault, for sure. It's that person or those people. And once that's why letting this stuff go on too long is so deadly, because the longer it goes on, it really does metastasize. And so, you just see these stories. And when you start talking to people individually, you hear the stories, and people are really, really upset. And it doesn't mean they're upset for bad reasons either, by the way. I don't discount. I mean, there can be very good reasons for it. But let's just say that 20% of your story is myth. That's a lot. Even 5% if you're 5% of your version of the facts is not true, you might believe it, but
yep,
it's not true. You've got it wrong. You don't sit in your boss's chair. You don't know the conversations they're having. You don't know why they're doing what you're doing. So you filled in the blanks because our brains want certainty.
that's right. Our brains are filling
That
in. So
I'll just go back to something that always helped me, that I honestly learned from my mentor, and people have credited me with it, but like I learned it from someone else, and that's kind of the way this whole thing goes. We're all learning from each other. We're
that's it.
either moving apart or coming together. There is no stasis.
Yeah. So there's a question in there from Jeremy about this, and I
Yeah.
think I want to get to it, and it's a nice segue.
Mm.
So the question is, how does conflict feed into trust building within organizations? Also curious to know how the user experience or accessible user experience, so maybe people with accessibility issues
Mm.
relate to trust. This idea of conflict, I have a point of view. I want to give you a chance to answer, and I have an anecdote to share. But you just described the truth. So how does conflict play a role in getting back to the truth of understanding why trust is broken down?
So in my past life, I was a family law. Well, I did other forms of law, but one of the primary things I did was family law. And this experience really helped me solidify that while many businesses think that, well, this is a business issue and that's a personal issue, there's no such differentiation. Until you actually only have robots working for you, humans are humans. I mean, different details, same trip. So the reason why a marriage is breaking down is the same reason why your board of directors broke down. Same thing. You might not be fighting over kids or a house, but trust is trust is trust. So, um, there I am. I needed more coffee today. Um, it it really comes down to a conflict. First of all, differentiating between a conflict and a dispute.
Mm,
So a dispute is over something I can see. I'm disputing your version of whatever. We don't agree, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're in conflict. Conflict suggests to me that we are fighting with one another. And to the extent that we're fighting with one another, um, how much are we talking about the tip of the iceberg and not talking about what's underneath the water level? And if it is an iceberg situation, which it so often is, it is not about what's on top of the waterline. It is not about that you got the raise that I wanted. Maybe I'm irritated by that, but that's not the real issue. And so, really, the key to unlocking all this stuff is getting to what's really going on. What is really the issue?
One of the things I've used the phrase, I won't say where I've used it, but this has been a recent example about conflict. And I did what you did and just described, is walked into a client space. They thought they had a problem. That's why they asked me to show up. I talked to a bunch of people, and it turned out there was a different problem below the iceberg. And we've been working together for a long time. And one of the things I said to them is, you are much more comfortable talking about each other than you are talking to each other. And I can't have the real conversation unless I trust on some level. All of the things you were describing about, questions about motivation, skepticism about intent, outright disagreement over your point of view, whatever it is. But I have to be able to work through my own discomfort to be able to talk to you enough about that and listen so that I can understand. And what I tell these teams is, my job is to create a single view and understanding of our shared reality. It's not that I have to make everyone think the same, but everyone has to have an agreement about what's happening, the dynamic, because our brains are filling in that space, right? And this is what I think is so interesting about trust. We started this conversation at the macro level, but we've whittled it down to this idea. At the end of the day, trust is built between individuals who have interactions, who then go through an experience to say, I now trust you because I've gone through that process. How do you address, like, what are some tactics you use to get under the iceberg? What are some things that you'll
Mm,
do with a team?
mm. Well, first of all, I'm going to go back to the word trust, and I want to acknowledge the second part of that previous point that we're talking about with regard to conflict, um, and why I started talking about family law, because, and this will get to your question. Um, the way conflict is an example of what I might call agnostically friction. And friction is incredibly powerful as a positive force or a negative force,
Mm,
right? We create fire with friction. We strengthen molecular structures partly through friction and heat. We heat up metal. We apply a lot of friction and pressure, and then it cools down harder, stronger. Same thing. That's the way we grow trust. So we need it to grow trust. The question is, what process are we going through, and what is our intention uh, with when we deal? We will deal with conflict. If you avoid the conflict, you will be weak. You may not be fighting openly, but you'll be weakened. So the way that we do it is first by acknowledging the truth, which is that my feelings are hurt. Your feelings are hurt. There is a resentment. There is an issue personally between you and me. And get out of this whole game of, well, it's business, it's not personal. So we're just going to talk about the business issues and leave the rest aside. That the rest that we're leaving aside that are so-called personal are the 90% of the problem.
90%. Yeah. Yeah.
At least they might even be more than that. Like,
One of the things I do with the team, and we're coming up to the end, this goes so
yeah.
quick. One of the things I do with teams is a little exercise called trust is given, trust is earned. And in organizations, what I find, particularly with teams, is there are a group of people who tend to operate from a "you have to earn my trust" orientation, right? They look at this transaction as a bit of a ledger. and there's so much stuff you put in and so much stuff you get out. Then there's some people, and this is a broad generalization, who are in the trust is given. I'll trust you until you demonstrate to me that I have reason not to. And we have people self-identify, and then we go through an exercise of saying on a 1 to 5 scale, how comfortable are you with conflict in relative terms? 1 being I don't really like it, 5 being let's bring it on. And we break these groups up and we match them together. And one of the things that's so hilarious about this process is, and I use that word because it happens every time, is the trust is earned people who rate themselves as a 5. What I tell them is, okay, give me 3 strategies to interact with a trust is given person who's a 1. And the first strategy is always don't take it so personally. And I remind people, you don't get to decide that for someone else, right? You may be gruff and rough on the edges, and I can take it and it doesn't bother me. At the other end of that transaction is a human being. And you don't get to decide how they handle conflict and how they build trust. You've got to meet each other in the middle. And so I was just sharing that as an example of this idea that, the hard work is down at person to person, team to team, interaction to interaction to kind of rebuild this. So my question back to you is what's the takeaway for organizations that, leadership teams, CEOs, executives who are the face of these multi-thousand person companies? How do they take these lessons and apply them when they can't kind of interact with every individual?
Mm. Well, I think number one, are you measuring for the level of trust? I mean, net promoter score is certainly important, but just double and triple down on really getting it and using everything that you can to figure out the health of the relational infrastructure of your company, of your organization. And if those roads and bridges that connect the human beings, because right now, we got a lot of AI and technology and it's exciting and oh my goodness, we can do all these things. This is only going to make human to human trust more important than ever. That is, so I would say always be looking at how you're measuring the impact of behaviors on people. And I know it's not that people aren't doing anything, but just keep reinventing that. Keep going back. You can be doing it better. We can all be doing better. And then really investing in modeling that behavior. People are watching what you're doing. Even if they're 3 layers, 4, 5, 10 layers down, depending on how big the company is, and you're appearing on a video screen at a all hands company town hall, your behavior in that, the way you're interacting with your direct peers is going to be noticed. People will see it, and they can smell authenticity and they can smell BS. And so when you demonstrate what it looks like to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be curious, to be courageous, that will absolutely flow down. And then third, invest in holding everyone positively, in a positive way, accountable for being rigorously honest and courageous to have the conversations. And that means you sometimes outside consultants, sometimes it's internal, and all the rest, as we all know. So I hope that
I love
answers your
that, Matt.
question.
That's incredibly well said, and there's a lot of good feedback in the chat about that summary. I want to leave it there, and I want to give you a chance, as is customary with this show. Your bonus question that was left for you is always a great way for us to get to know you, and I know this about you a little bit, so it's really well timed. What is the most impactful tipping point in your career, and what made it so?
Oh, well, yeah, there was a moment of deep um, unhappiness. And, when we're unhappy, almost angry, our emotions are so useful when we pay attention to them. And so I took that moment and said, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to not live this way, doing this type of work. And I acted. I made a decision. How do you know someone's made a decision? Watch their feet. But it's like I think about all of the emotions we have at our disposal. And yeah, I think listening to those feelings and then translating them into action, meaningful action, that sounds simple, but as we all know, it's not. And yeah, I'd say a period of very, very deep distaste with the work I was doing, and that was my previous law practice, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And then I love that signal that, or this idea that our emotions are signals, right? It's just like I wrote this in my book about the stress response. The stress response has one purpose. It's designed to get you to move. That's it. It doesn't know what you're moving from or to. It just knows that you're primed to move, and
Yeah,
emotions are a signal that something needs to change or be different. And what I think, maybe to put words in your mouth based on how you summarized, having the courage to act, right? Having the courage to move. We sit in things, I think, a long time, sometimes maybe too long, and so it just really, I just love that answer. So,
thank you.
Matt, is there anything you'd like to leave? How can people connect with you in addition to LinkedIn, or anything you'd like to leave with our listeners? You've gotten some really great feedback in the chat today.
Yeah, yeah, and I do want to acknowledge I see Sheila's comments. We don't have time to go and do them, and thank you, Jeremy, too. Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I know we do overlapping things, but it's not entirely overlapping. And so it takes a village. Reach out. I always like to offer a 15-minute confidential, if you're experiencing some friction on your team and you're just some difficult interpersonal issue and you want to talk it through, have a sympathetic ear with no obligation, just it's such value to have those conversations, even if it's not going to be a client.
Yeah.
So I will reach out on LinkedIn, shoot me a message, mention Top Voice Tuesday, you'll get priority booking, and happy to do that. There's also some resources in my featured section as well.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. And, thanks again for this idea that we all know low trust when we see it. We all have felt it. And I think what you've encouraged us to do is have the courage to have the conflict to repair trust. And there's no silver bullet. It's hard work. It's difficult work, but at the other end of that, it's really, really important relationships, systems, governance, organizations, and more importantly, outcomes. And that's why we're all here. So thanks again, Matt. Thank you all for dialing into Top Voice
Thank you.
Tuesday. We're going to see you next week. Have a wonderful week, everyone.